And I think about the music that I listen to. My question is also, is it poetry? Like Erica is playing now.
It's definitely poetry.
It's music poetry. But hello, welcome to, oh wow, the third month of our coffee and chat, our HBCU coffee and chat. I'm just honored that we still have so many great followers to support this. Today we have Ms. Carla Surratt, and our topic today is librarians and English educators. They share the importance of diverse poetry. And I'm so excited because Carla has a similar background as I do. We were both English teachers. I think you were an English professor at one time too, correct?
No, just a high school English teacher.
Okay, high school English teacher. Mm-hmm. And she's also now a director of a library. So with no further ado, I want to allow Carla to share a little bit about herself, and then we'll go right into our coffee and chat questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Carla Surratt, and I am the Director of Libraries at the University of Mount Union, which is located in Alliance, Ohio. I'm a native of Cleveland, Ohio, and recently returned back to the state of Ohio after being gone for 18 years. I lived in North Carolina for 16 years, and then spent 2 years in Pennsylvania as the director of the Langston Hughes Memorial Library at Lincoln University outside of Philadelphia, which is also Langston Hughes's alma mater. That's where he graduated from in 1929. So my path to librarianship, as Kira mentioned, I graduated from college and I was a high school English teacher in Columbus, Ohio for 4 years before I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And after I stopped teaching, I worked in customer service, dealing with HR and health insurance. So I think for me, a lot of my roles in between being a formal teacher and being a librarian, it still was imparting information. It was still educating people on policy, procedure, giving them information. For example, when I was in healthcare reimbursement, I helped people who had breast cancer and rheumatoid arthritis learn of ways to pay for their medication that they didn't know of, that there are different healthcare foundations and things of that nature. And it actually was timely because then my grandmother was diagnosed with breast cancer. I interned at the State Library of North Carolina when I was in grad school at North Carolina Central University in Durham, which is the only HBCU MLS library science program in existence today. Years ago, Clark Atlanta had a MLS program, as well as Hampton. And again, Central is the only one that remains. So I'm really proud of the fact that I attended an HBCU for graduate school, and one that has a historical role in preparing people to become librarians, especially Black people. That was very important to me. So that's my career path in a nutshell.
Okay. So I have a question. Obviously, I'm going to have a lot of questions, but a question for you. What is your favorite poem? And it took me a minute to like really go through all the poems. I'm like, but what is your favorite poem by an African American?
So I think the one that stands out for me is Dream Variations by Langston Hughes. And that's because in the third grade, we were working on a Black History Month program. And our teacher, Miss Katie, read Dream Variations. And I remember I sat by a window and all of a sudden I just started pantomiming this poem like I had been pantomiming my whole life as an 8-year-old. And so that became part of the Black History Month program. So I've always felt a strong relationship with that poem. But recently, last weekend, I'm scrolling Twitter and Haymarket Books posted a poem by Langston Hughes called Kids Who Die. And it's really powerful. And I actually have the link for the YouTube. Danny Glover narrated it. And I thought maybe perhaps people want to, because I wasn't familiar with the poem until last week. And I read it. And then this morning I was looking forward just to possibly share with the Coffee and Chat crew today. And I found this narration by Danny Glover, and it's also video. There's a video to go along with it, and within that video, I will let you know that it does show the picture of Emmett Till after he's been murdered, of what we're used to hearing about, how he appeared in the casket. And then it also shows when Walter Scott was shot in the back. There is a brief video of, I think, a bystander who was capturing it as it happened. I don't believe that from the videos, it's really quick, but I don't believe we see him fall from the shot. But I love it. And you just flashed "We Real Cool" by Gwendolyn Brooks. I had the absolute honor of meeting her my freshman year in college. She came to Wittenberg, where I went to school, and I got to go to lunch with her. And I have the book of poetry. It's on my shelf. I should have grabbed it, but she autographed it for me, and we bonded because I said, well, I capitalized the B in Black, and this was 1994. And she says, I do too. I insist upon it. And so that has always, I've always felt a kinship with her because of that, because we met. And I also have been fortunate to hear Nikki Giovanni speak twice. So, there's lots of beautiful poetry everywhere. Jill Scott's book of poetry, Tupac's book of poetry. There's novels in verse. And that was a long answer to a very short question, but
it was much needed. And what's interesting is I pulled up a couple of my favorite poems. "We Real Cool" by Gwendolyn Brooks. And I also love Bell Hooks. I actually was the director of library at Hopkinsville Community College in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And of course, that's where she's from. So the first thing I'm like, oh my gosh, this is where Bell Hooks is from. And I was able to meet her sister because her sister put together the display at the front of the library. So I was able to talk to her, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like the highlight of my job here in Hopkinsville, like being able to meet Bell Hook's sister.
Right.
But I still remember when I was in high school, when I listened, or rather read "We Real Cool." We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon. I remember the first time, you're like, oh wow, what exactly does this mean? And as you get older and older, you really see how important this poem is, particularly for the Black culture.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yep, you can actually break this down. We real cool, how we left school. A lot of times people think, oh, well, you were skipping, but oftentimes it's not a skipping thing. And you can probably attest to this being an English teacher as well. We're put out of school.
Right.
We don't feel as if we belong.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. School is not a safe place for everyone. And I wish I could remember our conversation, because I know we spoke about this poem, just like her giving more context to it. But, in the time period that she wrote this, they were pool players, and they, maybe not pool hustlers per se, but what does that look like in the city of Chicago, where she lived for so many years, and thinking of Chicago today versus Chicago when she wrote this poem. And it's amazing how some works of literature, lots of works of literature, are timeless, no matter when you read them, and you come back to them with different perspectives as you live and observe things. So I think poetry is really powerful in that way.
You mentioned Chicago, and we think about the pool hall. It took me to Richard Wright. Richard Wright is by far one of my favorite authors too. I actually went to Paris, and I stood in front of the house where he wrote many of his pieces of literature. And again, that was just a highlight. Like, I'm going to Paris. I didn't care about anything else but Richard Wright's house, standing right there. But thinking about Bigger Thomas, I know we're talking about poetry, but, even when we look at pieces of literature, you think about the character, the protagonist, Bigger Thomas, and how Bigger, he was at a pool hall, and everything about this particular poem really ties into the characteristics of bigger.
Yes. 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 And it's great that you mentioned Richard Wright, because there's a book that he wrote years ago that he was never allowed to publish, and they're finally going to release it. I'm not sure when, I forget the date, but it's sometime this year. And of course, the title escapes me, but I'm looking forward to adding that to the library that I work at, as well as my personal library, because how great is it that something that he fought to get published and was never allowed to publish is now
Your
going
bit,
to be
you
read. It's weird. You're trying to tell me that I froze, but you're the one who froze on my end. So,
do you have a favorite oh, there we go.
okay.
Okay.
What did you
We were
say?
talking to, I don't know if you remember, but you were discussing Richard Wright's book.
Yes. And so I can't remember the title, but it's coming out this year. It was something that he wrote many years ago and was not allowed to publish. And they are now releasing it posthumously. So I'm looking forward to that text being released, and for others to, because we know Native Son, we know Black Boy. And it would be great to see what this work is, what it shows about him, and what he wrote, and how does it differ from Native Son and Black Boy? How is it similar to Native Son and Black Boy? And what will scholars say about it?
You know, many people don't even know that Richard Wright, he wrote haikus.
Yeah.
So I have another question for you. Why do you feel that diverse poetry is important for our school system? Because I don't know if you recall being an English teacher, but we didn't really have, I'm gonna speak for me, I taught in several different states. We didn't have many many pieces of poetry by Blacks or even other minorities in our system, in our curriculum.
Right. We didn't. Um, and I know I didn't teach a lot of poetry, but for me, it's important because we always learn the white perspective, history and literature, and even science. If you think about, Hidden Figures coming out in the last 5 years, we
Mhm.
always knew about John Glenn. We knew about them going to the moon, but we didn't know there were Black women behind that. If Katherine Johnson hadn't figured out that math, would he have ever made it to the moon?
Mhm.
You know, and her work, her math still has benefits today. Think about Henrietta Lacks, all the things that her cells accomplished that we would not have. I believe her cells even help with the coronavirus vaccines,
Mhm.
and I feel a special kinship to Henrietta Lacks because we have the same birthday. Yeah, but in terms of poetry and literature, it's important because the world is not white, and our perspectives of life are just as powerful and significant and well written and have meaning as uh, what is that woman's name? Emily Dickinson.
Mhm.
I never gravitated towards her poetry, and I was an English major, of course, but I read that poetry that spoke to me. The Maya Angelou, the Gwendolyn Brooks, Langston Hughes. And I'm fortunate that I did have a teacher. I mean, because I think back on it now, I was in the third grade. My school district was all Black. But Ms. Caveney, the teacher I referenced from the third grade that put on the Black History Month program with our class, she was a white woman. But she saw, and I know people are like, oh, well, that should be expected. She's teaching a Black school. But there are a lot of all Black schools that white teachers do not bring forth that type of material to the students that they're teaching. And so they don't see it, they don't read it, and they don't, unless they have that extended village that pours into them that literature and that poetry, they don't have knowledge of it until later in life. And I know people who say that all the time. I never knew about so and so as a writer, and so it's very important, and it shows white people how broad our world is and how, in some ways, we're very similar. There's a lady, Rudine Sims Bishop, and she talks about literature being mirrors or windows. And there's too many times that we're reading something that's a mirror. Well, not always a mirror for us as Black people, but what's put in front of us, it doesn't reflect the wider world. We're not able to see through that window. And that's what we should strive for, is literature that is more of a window versus a mirror. So it widens our perspective of life. We all have, in reading across genres, I read picture books, I read young adult fiction, I read, of course, adult fiction and nonfiction, but there are lots of books about troubled teens, both white and Black. But if you only read the white perspective, like I remember reading The Outsiders and the other books by S.E. Hinton. But where were those books when I was that age that were Black? Now, fortunately, I did come across Rosa Guy and I can see because I remember they were these old books, Teacup Full of Roses, and her last name is Childress. She wrote different books that were that teen element, New York and everything. And I don't recall Walter Dean Myers as much when I was in K through 12, but I do recall him once I started branching out and seeing more. And I'm grateful for Walter Dean Myers. And for those who don't know, his book Monster is being adapted, coming out pretty soon. That is like one of his pivotal books. So our books are just as worthy of being adapted into movies and TV series as Game of Thrones and Walking Dead. We have a lot of great stories that can become movies, and some of our poetry can become movies as well. If you think about it, wouldn't it be awesome if you one day saw a limited TV series or movie that's based on We Real Cool? If someone were to analyze that poem and flesh it out into a 90-minute movie or
I can see a documentary with that too.
Yeah. I mean, it's lots of possibilities. I mean, look at what happened with Queen Sugar. I remember I didn't gravitate towards the book. But when I heard about the TV series, it's become one of my favorite TV series. So, we have so many wonderful, powerful stories, literature and prose, as well as in poetry form. And they need to be shared. Our stories have just as much value as Nathaniel Hawthorne, as The Crucible. We need to be centered. And I'm not meaning to exclude the Latinx perspective, the Asian perspective, but honestly, we're often left on the fringes. We're seeing an increase, of course. I've noticed that definitely in the last 10 to 15 years. But there are so many more stories to be told and shared.
Because it seems like the stories that are shared, they are the white savior stories.
Yes.
So they're the unrealistic stories, and people don't understand that they're just as many successful, like you said, the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I still remember when I first read that book, I was an adult when I first learned. I was a college professor at that time, and I'm like, wow, I never knew this. But there are so many stories that are out there, real testimonies that we overlook. And one of our guests, Joyce, she says the classics are only classics to those who are teaching them. If teachers aren't diverse and bringing themselves to the classroom, all students are missing out. And you're exactly right. I still remember being a brand new English teacher, I think maybe 3 years in, and I gave a presentation. And this was in the early 2000s, and it was along the lines of Shakespeare. We should find Shakespeare is not the best, or something of that nature. It was a real simple topic. And when I went to go present, I thought that teachers were throwing hammers at me because I'm a brand new 20-something-year-old teacher. And they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. Shakespeare is the best. And I'm introducing them to the Pact. I'm introducing them to so many different pieces of literature that, they were like, well, what is this? We don't want this, Shakespeare. But again, we need to figure out ways to connect with our students.
Right. And what I would do for my ninth and my 11th graders is I would create a reading list of about 30 to 40 different books outside of what I was not so much required, but expected to teach, each year, the different, To Kill a Mockingbird, Romeo and Juliet. And they were all diverse, nothing classic, because no one did the summer reading. Let's just be honest. They didn't read it. This was too hard. I struggled with this. I know one year our summer reading was Their Eyes Were Watching God. And my students didn't like it because they couldn't. And I taught at a school that was about 30-30 Black, white. And then there was like 20%, or that's not even full math, 40-40, and then 20%. I was not a math teacher.
Okay.
But I had an honors class, and that was predominantly white. And they're like, we didn't understand what was all this A, because they wrote I'm as AH apostrophe M.
Yeah,
and they struggled with that. Yeah. And I said, it's unfortunate that you are in the 11th grade and you're just now experiencing this, but this was Southern. I didn't call it Negro dialect. I said, this is Southern dialect. I said, you're in Ohio, you're not used to this, but yeah. So, but I gave them other contemporary books to read, and I gave them a variety of different projects, like, create a blog post from the point of view of one of the main characters, because the tried and true book report, it doesn't fully capture everyone's learning style. So I would have students like, hey, draw me a scene from the book the way you think it went down. So you're engaging them in multiple learning styles too. And it's more fun, have them video or act out a scene from the book or a missing scene from the book. So I found, and I'm sure they're still out there, the different book report alternatives and things of that nature, just to give them the opportunity to connect with the book in their way. And that way it wasn't a right or wrong, or you didn't fully tell me what happened in the book that I already read, so I already know what happened in the book, but you didn't respond to the book. I want you to be able to respond to the book in a way that is meaningful for you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Just like poetry, that's another question I have, but with poetry, I had students create beats to a particular poem.
Okay.
They were able to rap or to sing that poem. And it was just amazing how they would, kind of twist the entire poem and make it seem as if it meant something else. They personalized it. Awesome. I just lost my question, Carla. I just lost my question. Oh, I know what it was. At the beginning, I was listening to Erica Badu, Tyrone. Do you believe that music is poetry? Do you believe that this right here should be taught during Poetry Month?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is where you can really infuse what they listen to. Now, some of the stuff, lyrically, you don't necessarily want to play it in class. But when I was teaching, Jill Scott came out, and that's my girl. So I would play that CD to death. And I was like, we're tired of listening to Jill Scott. Turn on something else. But it was poetry, and she actually has a book of poetry. She started off in spoken word, and she has always said she's always been a poet. So that's where you incorporate Deaf Poetry Jam, which I know they don't really have that anymore. But that spoken word element. But a lot of music, I honestly think more music is poetry than not. Whether it's hip hop, whether it's gospel, R&B, country. I don't listen to country or anything, but I think all music, all music is a poem. It's just that when we come acquainted with it, we're hearing it with the music. But Tyrone is definitely a poem. I could definitely see Erica on stage without music, the music that we know the song with someone playing the bass and, maybe having a little drum behind it, and her being Erica the way we know her, reading this, reciting this as a poem. Absolutely.
I've been riding with my son. So my son has to drive me around for a while now. He's 18 years old, and I'm always nervous about getting in his car because I don't know what's going to be playing on the radio or on his through his phone. But as I'm listening to many of these rap lyrics, what's really interesting is you hear reference to things, whether it's movies, whether it's a TV show, whether it's an old song. And I know just the other day he drove me somewhere and I don't remember what it was. I don't recall what it was. I'm like, you know what? Oh, do you remember the rapper Moni in the Middle?
Absolutely. Yes.
Moni in the Middle, where she at? But it was a reference to Moni in the Middle. And he was like, what's that? And I Googled it for him. And of course, after he finished driving, I let him see it, listen to the song. But, so many of these rappers that teachers are almost intimidated by, because you think about the makeup of a school system, just like you think of the makeup of a library.
Right.
Libraries are consisted of mostly 80 to 90% white women. And so many of the white women and white men are intimidated by the music that our students listen to,
Right.
especially just, being candid, our black males, they have their their earbuds in and they're listening to this loud, music with a lot of profanity in some cases. So
Right.
how would you suggest, or what rather would you suggest for them to do to build relationship so that they can open up the doors for students to understand the importance of diverse poetry? Does that make sense?
So um a lot of it, I think, comes from them not seeing us fully. They were lumped in together. Even the most liberal white woman, let's just take it for example, white woman children's librarian. Um, they might like, let's say, Will Smith.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of that, like, almost retirement age
Yeah.
librarian who would have maybe been in her 20s or 30s when Will Smith came out. And so that's her fondness, or maybe she liked OPP, because inevitably, I don't know why, but a lot of people like that song. So that's considered clean rap, and not that we don't have any clean rap anymore, I'm sure we do,
Yeah.
but they it it would take some professional development, some cultural adjustment, um, and decentering themselves. There are some rap lyrics that offend me, but I don't take it as rap bad. You can't listen to it around me. It's just, hey, can you turn your volume down? You're in the library, that sort of thing. And maybe ask, like, hey, who you listening to? Oh yeah, I've heard of them. When I was coming up, I listened to Run DMC. You can't just treat it as, oh, what you're listening to is trash and you don't know nothing. You know how, and I think we were about the same age. Our parents would say to us when we were like in high school, oh, y'all don't know nothing about good music. Da, da, da. We had this, we had that, and it happens. It's cyclical, because even now I'm like, I don't even have to. It's like, oh God, this music y'all got, it ain't nothing like the 90s. The 90s is like the best.
It's the
That's
best.
how
I get.
that's how our parents feel about the 70s and maybe the 60s, depending on their age. So you have to, I think, like, just how I said it just now was kind of humorous, and not like, oh, your music is horrible, it's trash, boo. It's, you have to, be relatable. And I think that's for anything that you say to someone. You can't just come up to someone without a relationship and just like, oh, I hate your music, I hate your clothes, pull your pants up. Then they equate you with police. They equate you with um censorship in a way. So, you have to be respectful of how you approach them, think about how you approach them. Um, and again, it's that window mirror thing. If you're always looking at yourself and those like you, when you're looking through a window, it's just like, there's a level of disgust or loathing for something that's different than you. And then that comes across to the people that you're trying to help or not help, and you don't realize that because of that attitude you're hindering being able to have a relationship with them, whether it's referring a book to them or answering a question that they have, like, oh, I need help finding this for an assignment. If you're not genuine, they pick up on that, whether it's a 2-minute interaction or a 30-minute interaction.
They do. I say that all of the time. Our students, I do not in any way compare them to animals, but they're like dogs in the sense of, I don't know if you have a dog, but my dog, before he allows you to touch him, he has to sniff you. He has to
Yeah.
check to make sure you're okay. And many of our students are the same way. And again, I'm not comparing a student to a dog.
Right.
Our students, they do want to make sure that you're a genuine person.
Right.
Juan has a question. His question was, why was Richard's book not allowed to be out before? And I don't have the answer to that.
I don't have the answer, but I know if you Google, because it's been, I've seen it a couple of times on Twitter this week, and I know it's a web-based article, but if you Google Richard Wright and unpublished book or something of that sort, look for something that's recent, it should come up with at least the title of the book and maybe some references to what happened with the publication being stopped. And it might not have ever been stopped. It might have been something, he wrote it, hey, this is my next book, and they're like, nope, that sort of thing. So we weren't there, we don't know. And of course, Richard Wright is no longer with us to be able to say, oh, this is what happened. And I'm sure possibly because I don't know where his papers are. That's what I'm thankful for, is that a lot of our deceased Black authors left their papers with some library. And I'm hoping that there is something in his papers that allude to the issue of why this manuscript was never published, and or he wrote a letter to one of his fellow authors saying they didn't publish this, or he told someone and they referenced it. So somebody somewhere someday will find the real answer and not just the politically correct answer of what happened to the publication.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Carla, if you could sit down with a poet from any time period, or an author, because most authors, they're poets too, who would it be? That's a hard.
I'm gonna give you two.
Okay.
Deceased, it would be Langston Hughes.
Okay.
Because that was, and I'm sure I probably read other poets before then, but because he also, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but not only did he go to Lincoln, where I worked at the library named after him, but he lived in Cleveland, Ohio. He graduated from Central High School. So I would love to just talk to him. His life, he died at 65, 66 years old. And I just would love to know what he's thinking now about all the things that have happened since his passing. And I would love to talk to Nikki Giovanni. I've heard her speak twice. She's an amazing speaker. She keeps it real. She keeps it real, real, real. If you've never heard her speak, find something. I'm sure there's something on YouTube with her speaking. She's very candid. And I just love her energy. I was fortunate to meet Gwendolyn Brooks and have a conversation with her. So that's why I would pick Langston and Nikki.
Okay, so when you were an English teacher, how did you diversify your classroom? I know you say you taught 9th and 11th grade.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, particularly 11th grade, because that's American Lit in most school systems.
Yes.
So how did you, you can tell the English teachers.
Yes.
11th grade was always my favorite.
Yes, so, mine too.
So how were you able to diversify your classroom? Let's focus on 11th graders.
Okay, so my 11th graders, so one thing I will say is that I love to show movies when I talk. Mm-hmm. And so with my 11th graders, we do basically American Lit is chronological for the most part. So colonial America, blah, what's that? I forget the one person, all that stuff. I would teach the Crucible. I really did enjoy the Salem Witch Trials, because I told them, I said, this is teenage gossip, y'all. This is what happens when y'all gossip and it go from this person to this person. And by lunchtime, you hate the person that was your best friend that's this morning on the school bus. So I would
completely change.
Yes. So I would break it down in that sense. Because how could they believe that these people were witches and killing them? But what I did, and this was what I started, the first time I showed it was with my 11th grade honors class, which was like 98% white. And I had 3 or 4 Black students in that class. I showed roots.
I love it.
I showed Roots, and initially it was just going to be the first two. This, as a matter of fact, this is how old this was. It was VHS. It wasn't DVD. It was Hollywood Video, and Hollywood Video lets you rent educational films for free if you were a teacher.
Okay.
So I showed them the first two films, and our classes were 88 minutes long. So we basically watched one a day. And I said, okay, well, we're done. They're like, no, we need to know what happens next. So we watched all, I think it's six parts. We watched all six
Yeah.
parts. They
Wow.
loved it. They loved it.
So random question before you continue. Did you get a lot of issues with the parents?
Never heard a thing.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Gratefully. Now, but
2021, you think about all the issues that people will have while watching such
yes,
a movie.
yes. And I think there's several reasons for that. No social media. This was 1998, 1999 when I first did it. So no social media. I think Black Planet was the king. Yes, Black Planet was my spot. And two, I think some again relatable. I was not this. I was only when I my first year teaching, I was 23. They were 17. We were 6 years apart. So in their mind, because literally I got asked to prom several times that year, and that has nothing to do with diversifying with the curriculum. But anyway, so yeah, I showed Roots, and trying to think what else I would have done. It might not have been with that 11th grade class, but with another 11th grade class, and during that 4 years there, I showed the Green Mile.
Oh, you could have done that. One of my least favorite books, and I'll talk about this because it's like my therapy, is Huck Finn. I had colleagues who they had students pretend as if they were slaves.
Oh no, I never did
They're
that.
still working. They're still working. They actually have, they had to create a board, how would you do X, Y, and Z? Or one of the questions was, why should Huck Finn continue to be taught? But at any rate, with Huck Finn, I stopped it after chapter 10 when you meet Jim.
Mm-hmm.
I took it to the Library of Congress, and we read slave narratives. We read real slave narratives, and that right there, it opened my students' eyes up. But in that particular class, this just happened a couple of years ago. I only had one Black female in that class, and she was so distraught by the book because I was trying to mirror what my colleagues were doing. And after, doing it one day, I said, I just can't. They wanted to read the book aloud, and you think about how many times the N word is in that book. And I know that my white students who were in the class, they didn't mean anything by it. However, they would laugh and they would, just kind of giggle. And
right.
felt so uncomfortable. And it didn't matter because before any piece of literature, we always did research. It's a librarian in me,
Right.
So when we read The Crucible, I took the time to have them do research about that time era. With Huck Finn, same thing. Let's look at it. Let's look at the big picture. So that's something that I do to diversify the curriculum, is making sure we're looking at it from a very objective point of view. Because oftentimes, like you said, or someone said, maybe it's something I just read recently, but we know teachers, they go in with their own viewpoint. So they only go in teaching their comfort levels.
Right.
And as an educator and even as a librarian, one of the things that we need to learn how to do is to allow students to teach us. So we have them do something similar to, it's not a book report, but some type of report. Hey, take the time to look up Huck Finn, look at the era. So I would give each group, I would break them up into groups, and each group had to, they had a task that they had to look up. Whether it was the era or whether it was, Black slaves during that time, whatever it was, they had to look it up and then they had to present it to the class. And in all honesty, they taught me so much during this time. And this right here is something that I'm always preaching to teachers and educators and librarians, let the students teach you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Because that they learn it better if they when they research it to teach it to someone else, they definitely learn it better. And I know I taught, they could pick either, and I didn't encounter this until I was in college. My white English teacher had us read Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs.
Mm.
So, and we had to read that, and we had to read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, his first autobiography. So I had my students choose which one do you want to read, the men or the women. A lot of them it was actually pretty even in terms of, because Harriet Jacobs' book was like 300 pages, and Frederick Douglass is really thin. But and I was honest with them. I talked to them about slavery, and I said, it still has ramifications. And we could look at it when we watched the Green Mile. Well, one year when I showed the Green Mile, my class said, well, now we need to watch Shawshank Redemption. And I was like, I had never seen Shawshank. So
Oh,
I watched it for the first time with them. And so their final exam was to compare and contrast Shawshank Redemption with the Green Mile.
wow, that's pretty.
And
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So I didn't always, because now I think back on certain books like, oh, I could have did this and this, but a lot of it was difficult because students wouldn't always buy books. And even though I would say, oh, go to the library, students wouldn't go to the library.
And so,
I
as
would,
you're talking about those books, I have books that are coming to my mind are Nig by Harriet Wilson,
yes,
and the life of Olata Equiano.
yes,
So those are things that are coming to mind, because there's so many, people feel as if, oh my gosh, we don't have enough pieces of literature, but in all actuality, there's so many pieces of diverse literature. It's just a
yes,
matter of calling a friend or taking the time just to Google and do your own research.
yes. And I do remember we did read, there was an excerpt of Equiano in our textbook. So I had them read that. Um, and in my time when I was teaching, it was Yahoo. There was no Google anything, it was Yahoo. It was the Yahoo search, and Ask was Juno and all that. Um, but yeah, I imagine now teaching, there's a lot more diverse narratives that I would use. And I've seen a lot of different authors. I follow many of them on Twitter and Facebook, and they've created educator guides for a lot of their books. And they engage with librarians and teachers on social media. They have giveaways for their different books. There's a lot of great content out there. Zen Ed Project is mainly a history related resource, but they do a great job with incorporating diverse narratives in
That
history.
again, in case anyone wants to hear it.
Oh, sure. It's Zen, Zinn. It's named after Howard Zinn, who was a white historian. Zen Ed Project. They have a website, but I mainly see their tweets.
Zinn.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Zen
Yeah.
Project.
Zen Ed.
Zen Ed.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah.
got it.
Okay.
Right.
But they're a great resource. I've learned a lot just seeing their different tweets pretty much every day. A lot of Black history related items. I've learned of different massacres and riots that have happened historically. Before I left Pennsylvania, I lived in Wilmington, North Carolina,
Mm.
and that was I needed a job, and it's like, wow, I'm living here, and that was one of the most racist places I had the experience of living. I lived in Charlotte, Durham, and Wilmington, and Wilmington was by far uh, a very, it's not an easy place to live as a Black person, and primarily because I was working in the library, so I'm interacting more in depth with white people. Whereas when I lived in Charlotte,
Charlotte's
my
a lot more diverse too, especially
yeah,
now it is. But yeah, Charlotte and even Durham, even with the history that Durham has, I went to North Carolina A&T State University.
yes,
So in Greensboro, right up the street. There's a lot of history in both places, but it's a lot easier to live there because there are more Black people that are that are willing to advocate in
yes,
areas. But yes, Wilmington is probably the way that I felt in Hopkinsville, and even as an English teacher, I was in Madison, Florida. Um,
okay.
so those areas, it was a lot. So I have a follow-up question for you. How have you, your library, how have you made sure you're diversifying your library? Because again, I know for me, it's first of all, I applaud you too. Congratulations, because I didn't know this until I became a library director, but there are not many Black women library directors.
No.
So you could probably count count how many, probably with your fingers and your toes, and this is 2021, may not even be that many, but there are not many Black women library directors, particularly for college, community colleges, or really anywhere. So
Yeah.
congratulations on your position that
Thank
you
you.
have. But how have you ensured that your students of color, they feel welcome in your library, particularly during April, during Poetry Month?
So coming from Lincoln with HBCU, it was an adjustment. Um, and and then being in a pandemic. So I do right now, I'm the primary person who orders all the books for the library. And so I go happy, like, oh, this. Oh, I want to read this. So let me order this. So I definitely order books that are more reflective, even though our Black population isn't that big, but because this is that thing now, anti-racism task force, diversity, equity, inclusion, um, all of these things that are, I think we're seeing multiply more than we would have seen a year and a half ago. And it gives us, I guess, a sort of level of freedom to make sure that we're purchasing these things to make our collection more representative. So I do have a lot of Black books, LGBTQIA plus books, those different narratives, bringing them in, because the person I replaced was a director for 32 years. He was a white man.
Mm.
And, there's a difference there. So what happened was we have these display cases in the library, and the displays have been up for forever. And I said, oh, well, I'll work on one. I'll do one for Black History Month that was coming up. And the theme for Black History Month this year was the Black family. And I was like, sometimes even though the theme is great, it didn't resonate with me for a display. And it wasn't until Inauguration Day when Amanda Gorman spoke. Yeah, I was about to say Gorman. I'm like, no, that's not her name. Gorman did her poem. I said, oh, this is what I'm going to do. So I wrote or typed it up in Canva, put her pictures in the background, and took 4 pages, 4 11 by 17 sheets to type up her entire poem. And then I took poets from years and years ago, our traditional classics, to the contemporary, some children's authors who write novels in verse. I had images of them, images of their books, and I just made it collage because our displays are these flat cases. And one case is still up because I just didn't take it down. And because it's set in celebration of African American poetry. So it worked for February. March, yes, I know it's Women's History. There were a few women in there in that display case, and it's still there for April. I created, and I just published it this week, our Africana Studies Lip Guide. So when I came to Mount Union, they had 3 or 4 lip guides. They hadn't been touched in 5 years. I had to advocate to get those featured on our website. And so since then, we have grown. We currently have 58 lip guides.
Wow,
And
that's a lot. I'm impressed.
yeah, yeah. And so 2
If
of the
you
lip guides.
could you stop 1 second and share, because I know we have educators, because they would really benefit with understanding what lib guides are. You want to
Oh,
share what
sure.
lib guides are?
Yes. So lip guides are short for library guides. It's just as one word. There's a company that provides us the space to create these. And just think of it as that old school brochure or typed page of a list of books. And instead of it being a brochure where you flip through, it's an online resource. So it's basically a website. And we have a list of whatever that library is, the collection of their books that they have on a particular topic. So for example, I have the anti-racism lip guide, and I did a deep dive into this anti-racism lip guide. I've got a tab. The series is called White Privilege. And on my white privilege page, I have white supremacy, white privilege. And so basically it's like, look, white people, this is all you right here. But I also have a page in the anti-racism guide on economics and housing, because all of these things that are part of systemic racism, I wanted to show just how deeply entrenched racism is for us on a daily basis. It's not just, oh, white person was mean to me or a white person fired me. It's how they talk to me,
Microaggressions,
housing,
the
jobs,
yeah,
education, how I have a lot on education, like I broke it down, K through 12 education and higher ed. Yeah, SpringShare is
yep,
the
thank you,
company.
Joyce. Yep, I love Spring Share.
So SpringShare is the company, but not, I won't say each university, but most university libraries have LibGuides. I even had them at our public library. So if you, whatever your alma mater is, if you just Google their name and put LibGuides behind it, I'm sure they have LibGuides, and you can see. For universities, we typically have guides on each of like the majors and minors of a university, but I also like to create special topics ones. And so I've been working on it and I just haven't published it yet. I have one, hopefully I'll publish by his birthday, Good Trouble, dedicated to John Lewis.
Look at
And
that.
the reason why it's not published yet is because I wanted to create a timeline.
Mm.
And his life is so much and so rich that I want to make sure I have everything accurate and correct. And I like to make things nice, look nice. So, but it's just a great way to showcase our books primarily, but then also our databases, which are those scholarly peer-reviewed sources. A lot of libraries have streaming video. And I also include external websites. For example, the Africana Studies Guide. I have a link to over 20 African American museums in the United States.
Oh, wow.
So it's just different content, but it allows you to create something for both teachers and the students at the university, or anyone, because they're not private. It's just that you know you might not have access to be able to check the book out from that particular library, but then you can check for it at your public library or your academic library, and or purchase it yourself directly. So I love them because we have so many books, we have so many databases and videos, and we don't always get to feature them. So this is just that way to showcase our collection and our resources. So yeah, I love them, and you know, feel free to look at Mount Union's. Again, it's a work in progress. I'm proud of what we have, but I hope to have it doubled by next year because we have 56 majors and minors, and I have a lot more to go and create. But and I can actually put the URL for Mount Union's in the chat.
We have about 5 minutes left, and before we end, I want to see if you have any final words before I ask for your final words, do any of our guests have any questions or any comments to our amazing guests, Carla? Okay.
Well, hold on. Thank you both for this session. How would you encourage people, children of color, to be librarians? Thank you.
So that's a great question because my friends tease me all the time saying I'm the only Black librarian they know. And I know that it's not true. There are historically a lot of Black people as librarians. For me, I had a love of
all of them, Carla. I think I know every last one of us.
I had a love of libraries. I had a love of books and reading. And in the fourth grade, that was my first library job. I got to shelve books during recess in our elementary school library, and the school librarian became a friend to my family. And so much so that when I went to take the praxis, which is the test to be, well, you all are teachers, never mind. But when I came home to Cleveland that weekend to take the praxis, and she was standing in line. We took the praxis together. So then we went out to lunch. So it's incorporating that, being a library user at an early age, incorporating a love of reading. And two, it's not just reading anymore. It's technology. Librarianship is more than what the common person thinks it is. You know, a lot of us only know the library from maybe the school library, the public, or the college library. There are special libraries. You could even, I actually applied and was in the interview process for the Smithsonian's African American Museum. They have a librarian. All of the Smithsonians do. Every state has a state library. You know, if there are people who are into archives or looking at old pictures, like I referenced Richard Wright's letters, and most, not most, a lot of historical Black people have papers, letters, documents. And so you have a wide gamut of people who are perusing through that. And maybe that's something that a person, you have a child who really loves history and they don't want to be a history professor, but maybe they love digging around in those things. Maybe they become an archivist. A lot of people, when I was at the state library, that was actually genealogy. I help people find their family on the census or find their old home, was it historic or not. And we know that genealogy is a big popular thing. So maybe, your students are interested in history or their family history. Maybe they become a genealogist. Maybe they won't be a traditional librarian. Maybe they'll be a school librarian. So finding librarians to come and speak to them, I know that doesn't feel cool because it's not always cool. But you have to have that librarian who's passionate about it and who can be engaging. Not everyone is that way. But I think starting with cultivating them having a love and a respect for libraries is important.
I didn't even realize the route that I needed to take to become a librarian until I became one. It wasn't until law school. I was about to graduate from law school. And the dean of our library was like, "Hey, Kiera, you should become a librarian." And so after graduating from law school, that's when I went to become a librarian. I'm like, wow, had I known about this, I would have just done this for the rest of my life. One of the librarians who I admire so much, I don't know if you remember, if you know her, but we probably all have these books. You have this book?
Jessie Carney Smith.
Yeah, so Dr. Smith, I email her. I love her. I email her at least a couple of times a week. She was at Fisk University for 50 years.
Yes.
And she is 90 or 91 years old. And I feel so honored because she emails me back all the time. Like, we have really engaging conversations. But at 91 years old, this was just published in January. Yeah. And so, she was, oh man, she was an amazing, I'm still considering her a librarian, because she still carries that title, but she was an amazing librarian at Fisk, so just think about, Fisk is a university, is a HBCU here in Nashville, Tennessee, but just to think about the path that she paved for many of us, so she has no idea. I don't even know if she ever watches my HBCU chats, but like this right here, when I realized a while back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I emailed the Dr. Jessie Smith. Everyone has this book. Yes. And then I was like, wow. She was like, yeah, I have another one coming out. So I think it's this is the 4th edition. That's the 2nd. So it's a total of 4 of them. So I'm just really honored that, that could be another way to diversify your classroom too. And to Pam, to also to encourage our students to become librarians, to get a librarian, like Carla said, to come and speak to the classrooms, because you have to actually have a master's to even become a librarian.
Yes.
You have to have that MLIS. I have an MLIS, but I think there are also MLSs.
I have the MLS, yes.
Okay. Yes. So, yeah, but Carla, I appreciate you so much. Do you have any final words, anything that you want to share with us? We have like a minute left.
Yes. So I put it in the chat. What I did was I created a list of, I broke it down, and it's not, science to it, because some books overlap into reading groups and reading ages, but it is called the African American Poetry. And it's a list of different children's books that are poetry, children's, middle grade, young adult, and a few links to some other resources, including the Brown Bookshelf, if you're not familiar with them. They are a group of children's books, authors and illustrators who are Black, and they celebrate and promote Black children's lit all year round. So I just wanted to make sure that you all had some sort of handout in case you're wanting to diversify your classroom, your reading, your own personal reading, because like I said, I read across age groups.
Thank you so much, Carla. And we do have Joyce. Yes, hello, fellow librarian. And
yes.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and end the session to stop the live.